It's April, and you know what that means. The fourth month of every season brings a unique tournament format with it, and April also heralds the start of the Revolution World Championship. So while the hype is building up to next rotation in May, we have plenty of things to keep ourselves busy this month. Before we can dive into the festivities, we have, of course, a new balance patch to go over. As always, there are links in the description below for your key resources to check out all things Revolution Custom Standard, such as the Custom Magic Discord server where you can get updates about and play the format against other people, as well as check out all of the cool cards and sets that folks in the community are designing. The Revolution Compendium, where you can look through all of the cards the curators recommend for consideration in your decks, sorted by card roles, and Manifesto, our dedicated Scryfall-like engine that lets you search through cards from sets currently in the format. Moving into this month, there are a whopping 70 new playing cards being added to the format for the Revolution Plane Chase variant in preparation for Grand Prix Halls of Valor. If you'd like to see all of those cards for yourself, a link to the list on LackeyBot can be found in the description below, or you can check out my review of the new Plane Chase cards through the info card on screen now. Now, while most folks will be gearing up for Grand Prix Halls of Valor and all the plane chase jankiness it has to offer, it's worth mentioning that we have 16 competitors signed up for the 4th Revolution World Championship. Congratulations are in order to Philippe Sanner, H Squid, Split Moon, Caillou102, Cool Beans, Platy People, Lilithor, Ricky Rister, Itayu Cool, Stasis, Drake, PTM, All Who Wander, Zangy, Provocative, and Laurel. Additional note of well wishes is owed to Grand Prix Estrath and Grand Prix Tugay winner Anarchist, who's unable to compete in this tournament, and everyone in the community is hoping the best for them. With the spotlight on our 16 world competitors being as it is, extra focus is placed on the 7 card changes this month's patch has to offer for the standard format, with 6 major hits and 1 card that's receiving a slight adjustment to match its mirrored mythic. Now, of course, everyone saw this one coming. Skotha, Titan of Eternal Dark, has had a lot of eyes on it over the last couple months, and for a lot of good reasons. The Untap Lands clause enabled it to be a free 6/6 with hand attack stapled on its cast for its base cost, or it'd be free hand attack from your graveyard with mana generation, thanks to its return and tuck ability. This all, in conjunction with the lackluster state of graveyard hate currently available in the field, paved the way for Grand Prix Petrasia to be pretty overrun by this card, with 7 of the 28 competitors in last month's field bringing the card in their deck for a 1 in 4 appearance rate, and 4 of those 7 players converting that into a top 8 slot. Hallmarked by Philippe Sanner becoming the first competitor in Revolution history to win 2 Grand Prix back-to-back, both times with Skotha Chronicles. Where last month's patch hit the winning deck solely on Chronicle of Awakening's base cost, this month sees some more drastic changes impacting that strategy, starting with everyone's favorite Titan, or least favorite if you really don't like it. Skotha's Enter an Attack trigger has been reworked away from untapping lands to granting the recursion of any permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard, not targeting and optional. Additionally, the trigger no longer targets a player to discard and instead has each opponent discard, making it slightly better if we ever end up with ways to give a player hexproof, but slightly worse and at taking a card from your own hand and putting that into your graveyard. Additionally, the cost for his From Graveyard ability has been made more restrictive, now costing 2 each of black and green mana to mirror the Titans from official Magic. While these changes do seem rough for its viability on the surface, there is still a ton to like about Skotha, as it now functions on a similar vector to Yeji Resplendent Idol in recurring valuable cheap permanents or even just lands turn by turn. But as has been true of Skotha in its prior iteration, it does so very efficiently, with very little hoops required, with looping potential on the table, and without really targeting so it's not vulnerable to pinpoint graveyard hate. Don't write Skotha off by any measure. This is still a better Sun Titan that can be used from the graveyard, and it pressures your opponent's hand while doing so. Lots to love here, just requires a redesign and reapproach of the shells it wants to be in. Also, a small final note on this card, the pronouns at the bottom right have been updated from she, her to he, him. Skotha was always meant to have the he, him pronouns, but was mistaken upon original release. In order to stay aligned with Skotha, Flage, Titan of Burning Wind, has also had his graveyard cost made more restrictive, but in consolation, he can now split up the damage from his Enter an Attack trigger rather than pointing 2 to a single target. Quite honestly, though, I don't think this does much to make Flage worth considering compared to where he used to sit. The sad truth of Flage is that the card draw and small damage is not really worth the 6 base casting cost, and the graveyard ability being made harder to pay for is a real price to pay, considering the damage is pretty small and you only get to sit a single card out of the equation. I've always viewed the graveyard ability as a cheaper flashback firebolt with a cantrip, and the fact that that wasn't good enough to make this card worth playing tells you a good bit about how strong this card really is compared to their mirrored mythic. Speaking of mirrored pairs, we have another change for the Aqua Crew after its previous nerf in the February patch cut down the number of times it could target and repeat its final trigger, as well as what it could hit. Aqua Crew is now also being limited further from once a turn, now doing once ever for its final trigger, unless of course you have a Warden of Depths in play when it would trigger. I think this is a far more flavorful rework, but one that I think will ultimately just kind of slightly impact Aqua Crew. Realistically, Warden of Depths has been hard to justify playing since its own rework in February, and realistically, Aqua Crew's trigger can still be used multiple times as long as it's a different instance of the permanent each time you're trying to trigger it, which can be accomplished by putting it into play over multiple copies and legend ruling the old ones, or finding ways to reanimate the ones you have in your graveyard. It's also worth noting this is not being mirrored with the Magma Council for the time being, but that is something the curators and set designer have expressed an interest in revisiting in a future patch. I did mention that Skotha wasn't the only hit to the Chronicles deck, and sure enough, Chronicle of Awakening is once again paying the price for its sins of land destruction. Moving forward, Awakening's third mode cannot target basic lands, leaving it open to punish greedier mana bases, but struggling to find purchase against basic dense decks like Green Stompy. Ultimately, this seems like it'll push Chronicle out of contention in the graveyard ramp shelves, but there may still be something worth doing here thanks to big splashy permanents like the Arbiter kicking around in the field. Cryptolabe is also receiving a hit here from exiling your entire hand and the top card of your library on enter to instead simply exiling one card from your hand after you draw that top card. This leaves you more vulnerable to hand attack, but more importantly, means that Cryptolabe's mana isn't as universal as it once was. Truthfully, I think Cryptolabe is still a very strong card, just requiring more intent behind deck building choices to ensure you're including ample ways to spend the mana from permanents with activated abilities to spells in graveyards so that you can maximize its value, as well as a little bit more intent behind what you choose to exile with it. I think the deck building costs here were already the best way to approach Cryptolabe. It just now places a greater emphasis on that preparation. It's still great for paying to sacrifice or surface Root Fossil, as well as flashback big spells like Chronicle of Extinction, both of which have gotten through this patch unscathed. Sifting Through Soot is receiving a slight hit to its speed by no longer triggering its landfall ability when it enters, ensuring that you'll have to work a bit harder for the necessary soot counters. This makes it a far worse top deck, which makes it even worse as a sideboard tool, which in my opinion, was where it really thrived. So aggro decks are happy to see this change happen. But if you do still want to build around Sifting, it is still findable off of both A Journey Begins and Contest Coordinator, and we do still have 8 fetch lands in the field, alongside other cards that can cycle lands in and out of play to offer a means of accelerating Sifting if needed. And hey, Skotha now returns permanents with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to play, so perhaps after sacrificing Sifting Through Soot to reanimate something, you could just Skotha and get it back to keep the engine rolling. Welding Rig is our final major nerf, thanks as always to Lilithor finding janky engines and pushing them to their limit. In this case, it's a similar story as with Chronicle of Awakening, where Welding Rig was being used in conjunction with artifact removal to pick off lands one at a time. Rig is now only able to convert your own permanents into artifacts, but as compensation, the tap ability now costs 1 less to activate, and both abilities no longer cost any life. So while it's far worse alongside artifact removal, it's now better against opposing removal, and it's more efficient for any Seal Shoal related purposes. Finally, on the Planechase side of things, Ruins of Missing Notes has had its Chaos mode reworked to prevent players from taking exiled unknown cards away from each other. Now, you remove the counter from the chosen exiled card and take it away as a selectable resource for your opponent, removing any chance that your opponent could have pressured you into using that resource immediately. Before we call it a day on this patch, the World Championship being the usual standard format means it's worth talking about what wasn't hit by this patch. While last month's GP was taken down by the green-black Skotha deck once again, it was also a very successful month for mono-green Stompy, with both players in the field that brought the deck making it to the top 8, and only not both making it further because they had to play against each other in the quarterfinals. Though they made it to the top 8 with a combined Swiss record of 7 wins and 1 singular loss. And of course, Provocative, the deck's biggest champion, made it to the finals with this deck after beating Philippe Sanner in the final round of Swiss to make it to top cut as the number 1 seed. In addition, a number of blue and red card engine tools saw significant play boosts last month, from Lightspeed Launcher to Savvy Smith, and from Aqua Crew Flagship to Blistering Cryo Phoenix. While many of these strategies struggled to convert to the top cut, with the only Launcher and Savvy deck to make top 8 relying on Skotha, the changes in this patch may be a boon for these strategies, especially now that they've had a month for folks to digest the different strategies and coalesce these ideas into stronger shells. Though the green-black ramp deck has had to take its medicine this month, there was decent showing for a Jund ramp shell leaning more on Warden of Tremors and red-based mana dorks. And in the wake of the changes this patch provides, it's possible that Jund ramp supplants its two-color cousin, especially since powerful tools like Chronicle of Extinction and Root Fossil get through unscathed. With their biggest Predator receiving multiple hits this month, white-based control decks from white-blue hard control to white-black colorless and Esper are also likely to get a few points in their favor. And then, of course, we have other successful strategies like Bant Builder, red-white ability aggro, and black-red blitz that are still fighting for the spotlight as well. It's hard to say for certain what the world's meta will shape up to be, but there are a number of powerful strategies lined up to fight for the top of the mountain and the world champion crown. And that's a wrap on the April 2025 Revolution patch review. I'm eager to see how standard metagame shapes up heading into Worlds, and how the Plane Chase suite impacts deck construction for Grand Prix Halls of Valor. We'll get more into the specifics of plane cards and deck building in the final part of our Road to Plane Chase series later this week. In the meantime, if you're interested in the format and not already playing, please check out the links in the description below, and I'll see you all in the Revolution chat. Take care, folks.